I want to tell you about a dream that I've had for over 45 years that I've never acted on. I really did want to, however, life kinda happened before I could really get it sorted. You could potentially argue that the timing could have been all wrong as well. There was a very pragmatic perspective I stood behind. However, I think it was more about the lens of pragmatism taking charge. For most of my adult life, there were many names for what I was feeling and facing. Responsibility, practicality, priorities, but underneath it all, it was just one simple, plain thing. This episode is about what I've learned when I've stopped running from it, and why the thing you're most afraid of at this stage in your life is probably the most important thing on your to-do list. So, as usual, grab a cup of something good, and let's get started. I'm sure you've arrived at the word that I'm actually referring to. It's a simple word, however, it carries a huge amount of weight. The word is fear. And I'll say from the outset, here's something worth saying out loud. Fear in your 50s is not the same as fear in your mid-20s. When you're younger, fear by and large is mostly about failure. Now, hear me out, I realise this is a blanket statement, but from the perspective of, what if I try and it doesn't work? What will people think? What if I embarrass myself? In those days, you're kind of fearless for the most part. I remember being relatively fearless when I was in my mid-20s as well. You know, anything can happen and I'll bounce back, I'll be good. The fear when you felt, though, is real, and I'm not reducing the intensity of that in the slightest. However, when you're younger, you've got time to recover. You've got the luxury of a longer runway ahead of you, all being well. Fear at 50? It's a little bit heavier. It comes loaded with decades of accumulated decisions that you've made, some good, some not so good. Every path potentially not taken, every dream deferred. Every time you said, not yet, maybe later, when things settle down a bit. And then all of a sudden you've hit your 50s and the maths all changes. You started to feel the finite and mortal nature of time in a way that you never did before. And that creates a very specific kind of fear. Not the fear of failing, the fear of never having tried, and potentially the looming fear of regret. That fear, that particular quiet, persistent dread that you may fall off your perch and realise that I never actually started the very thing that I was supposed to do. For me, I'm forever the optimist, much to the great annoyance of my family. So I don't see this thing as a warning. In my view, I see it as a compass. Since I was a kid, and I'm talking maybe 7 or 8 years old, potentially a little bit younger, I've always wanted to fly helicopters. I was truly fascinated by how these massive machines would fly, the noise they made, and the magic of how they would defy gravity and just sit there in the sky in a hover. I was also very inspired by the TV shows Blue Thunder and Airwolf that donned our TV screens in the UK back in the 1980s, and I remember distinctly saying to myself, this was what I wanted to be when I grew up. It was clear and certain in a way that very few things are when you're that age. And then life happened. School, university, girlfriend, wife, career, family, mortgage. And every year the dream got further and further towards the back of the queue. Not abandoned, just deferred. There was always something more pressing, more sensible, more responsible to focus on. And I told myself that I would do this when things got less busy, when I had a little bit more money, when the kids were a little bit older, when work had calmed down. And you know how that goes. Then I landed a role that meant there was more of a real possibility of making that childhood dream happen, and it happened on Star Wars Day 2023. It was finally in reach. And then redundancy happened about 10 months later, and for the first time in about 30 years or so, the excuses just ran out. There was no busy, there was no career to protect, no schedule to honour, just a question sitting in silence that I'd been deferring for the best part of 3 decades. What are you actually waiting for, Norf? We'd made an investment to go on a family holiday to Greece, and I spoke to Mrs. Norf about this at great length. And after the long and short of it, she encouraged me to get after it, Norf. You know that thing I wear, get after it, Norf? That's what it stands for. So I booked the lesson just about a year after being made redundant. Not because I had the money to spare, not because the timing was perfect. And you may say, hang on a minute, Norf, that seems a little bit unwise and maybe irresponsible. You don't have a job and there wasn't money lying around. However, financially, we could move some things around to make it happen. So we decided that we would book it. I finally understood that perfect timing is just fear with a calendar. Needless to say, I was ecstatic. I could not stop thinking about the idea of flying, finally, after all these years. And just like a kid in a sweet shop, I felt like I was running around with my hair on fire, but in a really good way. A lifelong dream, again, was within reach. The day that I'd been dreaming about for many years had finally arrived. It was a beautiful, warm day in August 2025, and I went to my local airfield. I met my instructor, the Hoff, he was called. I saw the aircraft that I was going to take up on the field. It was already warm because it had been up already during the day. Captain Hoff showed me around the aircraft and shared a bunch of details about how the machine worked. Now, being an engineer, I soaked all of this up. My cameras were all set up and rolling, and I settled into the cockpit. And for the very first time, hands in my lap, I focused on every instruction from the captain. The aircraft itself was a Robinson R-44, and whilst it was powering up, the rotors were building speed, lights flashing, beeps and buzzes going off everywhere to ensure that we were going to be safe for my very first ever helicopter flight. I felt something that I hadn't felt for years. Not just excitement, I felt alive. I felt like every nerve in my body was firing all at once. The sensation of doing something that actually mattered. This wasn't just about helicopters and flying. It was proof to myself that I was still capable of choosing, that the chapter wasn't and hadn't been written yet, that I still had agency over the story that I was writing. If you're familiar with the series, you may know that I'm a big fan of the word reframe, particularly at the moment. So I want to offer you a reframe, and it's one that has completely changed how I see things and how I operate. Quite rightly so, most of us treat fear as a stop sign. We hit resistance, we feel uncomfortable, and we interpret that as evidence that we should no longer proceed, that we're not ready, that it's not for us. That said though, think about every meaningful thing that you've ever done. The career move that felt like a massive leap of faith. The conversation that you were dreading that positively changed the outcome of where you were going. The decision that absolutely scared the pants off you, but it turned out to be absolutely right. Fear was present in all of those decisions, not despite the importance of the thing, but because of it. Fear, I think, is your nervous system recognizing that something actually matters, that the stakes are truly real, and that this isn't some small, insignificant thing. It's actually something that requires your attention, and that intention must be active. Boredom doesn't scare you. Mediocrity doesn't scare you. The things that scare you are genuinely the things that could change your life for the good, and maybe not so good as well. But that's not a reason to stop. That's a reason to pay attention and focus. The fear is the signal. It's pointing at something that's really important. There are 3 acronyms for fear that I currently know of. False emotions appearing real. Forget everything and run. Or face everything and rise. Have a guess which one of those 3 that I lean towards. As you know, in this series, I want to get practical, so I want to talk about the 3 fears that I think are worth listening to. First, the fear of starting, the paralysis before you begin, the blank page, the first video, the first client pitch, the first day of training. This fear protects your ego, because if you don't start, you can't fail. However, it also guarantees nothing changes. So, in my view, starting badly is infinitely better than not starting at all. Second is the fear of visibility, and this one is huge for people over 50. Putting yourself out there, on camera, on LinkedIn, on stage. It feels much more exposing in a way it simply didn't 20 years ago. You potentially have much more to lose. More reputation, more history, more people watching. But I think the truth is, the people who can see you are actually the people that can help you. Invisibility isn't safety. It's just a slower kind of stuck. And thirdly, the fear of being too late. And this is the most insidious one. The quiet voice that says, the window's closed. that you should have done this thing 10 years ago or 20 years ago, that the market wants youth, energy, digital natives. That reinvention is for younger people and not for you. That fear is a lie dressed up as logic. From what I've seen, the data and the stories say completely the opposite. And every episode in this series is evidence of that. And when it comes to the fear of being too late, as a Brit, I call poppycock. Right, I'm going to stay practical, because identifying fear is one thing, but moving through it is clearly another. So here's an exercise that I call the Deferred Dream Audit, and it's decisively simple, which means that most people won't do it, but I say do it anyway. So the Deferred Dream Audit, so grab your weapons of mass creation and write this down. Step 1, name it. Write down the one thing that you've been putting off. The dream, the business, the creative project, the skill, the place you've always wanted to go, the version of yourself you've always meant to become. That thing that comes to mind before your brain gets in the way. Yeah, that one. Write that down. Step 2, name the real blocker. This is where you've got to write down why you haven't done it. And then look at what you've written. Is it really about money, time, practicality, or is it fear? And now this is where you've got to be honest and candid with yourself. Most blockers, when you look close enough, are fear wearing a sensible disguise. Step 3 is to find the smallest step forwards, not the whole plan, don't boil the ocean, not the entirety of the business plan, the smallest possible step. It may be one call, one search, one booking, one conversation. The goal isn't momentum here, it's proof to yourself that you are someone who acts on their fears rather than someone who manages their fears. Finally is step 4. This is where you've got to set a date, a specific date, not the year, not soon, a specific date. Put it in your calendar right now. You may need to think it through a couple of times, but put it in your calendar. Only hold yourself to moving it twice. Of course, there are things that pop up that you just can't avoid, but put this in your calendar. The thing is with a date, it makes it and keeps it real. Everything else is just intention. I want to leave you with something that took me the best part of 50-something years to understand and realize. The version of you that has been deferred, the business owner, the creator, the pilot, the writer, the person who does the very thing, they're not gone. They've just been waiting, very patiently, for you to stop having a reason not to. The redundancy took away my reasons, and being candid, for about 2 weeks, it felt like another massive kick in the pants. Then, whilst sat in the cockpit of that Robinson R44, I laughed. I genuinely belly laughed. Because I realised the fear I'd been carrying for those 40 plus years, the weight of an unlived dream, was lighter than the 30 seconds it took to book the lesson. You've done hard things, you've built things, led things, survived things. You've earned the right to be afraid of something that matters. Now do it anyway. Go suck at something new. Go and learn what that thing feels, smells, and tastes like. Do the Dream Deferred Audit. Do the 4 steps and bring this thing to life. If this episode did resonate with you, please do share it. Someone in your world may be carrying a dream deferred right now. They might also need someone to say, actually, it's not too late. So do pass it on. In episode 4, it's the one that makes most people, including myself, uncomfortable. We're going to be talking about money. Not that I have everything figured out, but I'm going to share some of the things that I've learned. We're going to talk about the real financial conversations about what it actually costs to reinvent yourself at 50 or maybe a little bit more than 50, and how to make the numbers work without gambling everything away that you've built. This is the 51st chapter, and fear is real, and even more so at the age that we are. However, ask yourself, which of the 3 fears will you be intentionally guided by? Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.